Hey guys, UnoPro here, back with part 2 of my Keyforge house analysis, and today we're going to be talking about board wipes. Now this is going to be a little bit different from my previous video. We're going to be getting more into the theory side of things and trying to understand how board wipes as a concept work in Keyforge, because Keyforge is very different to other card games and board wipes do function very, very differently. So we will still get into the houses and specific cards and playing around that kind of thing, but first I want to start off talking about the theory with board wipes. And you might be thinking, why the hell do I need to know this? Why do I need to understand how board wipes function? I can kind of just figure that out, kind of just play, all that kind of thing. But I think in Keyforge, this kind of having this deep general understanding of the game and the concepts of it is really, really important, because you're going to be constantly picking up new decks in a lot of these formats, sealed, stuff like that. Where you have to play a deck for the new times. You need to kind of know how a board wipe will function within a deck, and it's really, really important to be able to understand how strong a board wipe is dependent on the deck list that it's in, because you have formats where you're bidding chains for decks and choosing which decks to ban, stuff like that. It's very, very big skill in Keyforge to be able to look at a deck you've never seen before and kind of judge its strength, and that's not something that really exists too much in other card games. So we're going to be getting into a little bit of how you can tell if a board wipe is going to be good in a Keyforge deck. So let's talk about why a Keyforge board wipe. I should say what a board wipe is in case some of you are new to card games. Basically, kind of just talking about anything that says destroy all creatures, just tries to destroy all the creatures at once. I'm also going to kind of talk about stuff that deals damage to all creatures, because those can be played around a bit better. So why are they different? Well, the main thing in Keyforge is card advantage doesn't really exist how we know it. Whenever I play a creature, that replaces itself. So in a normal card game, if I play out 5 creatures and my opponent plays out 10, and then I board wipe, I've netted some card advantage because I've killed more of his cards than I am. Though in Keyforge, this isn't necessarily giving you an advantage like it would in another game, because each card has replaced itself. You haven't actually gained a net on cards. So in Keyforge, you need to kind of look to have gained the value from the board wipe in a separate way. Now, there's a couple of different ways that a board wipe will be beneficial to you, because just in isolation, a board wipe isn't actually going to be creating net positive situations, assuming you're both just all playing creatures out that have no abilities, because you equalize the board. So you kind of have a little bit of initiative, but you've already used a card that turn, and your opponent will likely have a stronger turn the turn after. So in a nutshell, yes, it can catch you up and kind of equalize you, depending on how you look at it, but it's not creating net positive situations just by itself, which is different to other card games. So how can you create these net positive situations? And this is important when you're actually looking and evaluating a deck list. I've got 2 gateways to dis in my deck. Are those cards actually a positive for me, or will they maybe just help me equalize? You want to have a deck where that's actually going to create net positive situations for you. So the most obvious way, and I won't harp on this one for long, is just artifacts. Artifacts will survive all the cards that say destroy all creatures. They'll give you some value, and they'll allow you to play cards that won't just get killed by the board wipe anyway. That's pretty obvious. I think most people can kind of figure that out for itself. So the kind of slightly subtler way of having a deck that benefits from board wipes is if you have a couple of board wipes, you prefer to have more cards that simply gain value instantly. Now this can just be as simple as the cards that have 1 amber attached to them when you play them, or cards with play abilities, but you want to be getting out your value from your creatures and actions immediately, rather than having them stick on the board for ages, because you're going to board wipe the board. So that's kind of the same thing. Though I think a really subtle thing with this, and this is kind of getting into some higher level, small percentage kind of things, is considering which house, because obviously you need some proactive plays in your deck. That's just like, you're not going to get enough, unless you're like Shadows maybe, but unless you're not going to get enough amber from just playing the instant game 1 amber cards kind of thing. So you want some proactive plays even in a board wipe deck. And I think the houses that those good proactive plays are in is really, really important with how it interacts with the board wipe. So let's take for the example that I have dis board wipes, okay? And I'm playing. Let's just say it's a two house deck for some reason. So if my proactive plays are all in Mars, when I have my Mars turn, I'll play out all my proactive cards. And as a general rule, at least early on, you often want to be swapping houses to kind of cycle through your deck and get your hands. So when I want to have my dis turn, maybe I've got heaps of discards in my hand now, and I've got a board wipe. Well, I've just done all my proactive plays. The board wipe is probably not even going to be positive to me. So you can see there that's not really that good. And if I had, you know, that board wipe in dis, and then all the other cards are just cards that gain 1 amber, sure, I can board wipe, you know, gain a couple of amber, but my opponent is now going to get to develop a board again. He's going to be head on the board, head on the initiative, and you can see how that's a negative kind of thing. Instead, if I have these kind of gain 1 or 2 amber cards in my Mars, I can play that the turn before, gain some amber. My opponent then develops his board. The gateway to dis is then going to be more one-sided, so clear the board. And the other thing about Keyforge is it's really easy to play out your hand after a board wipe, which is not normal in other card games. Normally it's I board wipe and back to you to replay your board. In this, you know, you can instantly just play out a bunch of creatures. So if you have your proactive plays post board wipe, that can be very, very beneficial. Though there is still that kind of downside that if you have good proactive creatures in dis, when you go to use them, you now have a discard in your hand that you don't want to play because it's going to kill your proactive plays. So it's kind of hard to evaluate, but you want to kind of consider these compositions of instant amber, instant value versus proactive plays and how that interacts with your board wipe. And that's something that is a very, very advanced skill. It's getting into, you know, very tiny subtleties, and you may think, you know, maybe that never really will matter. But I think it can kind of come up if you just think, you know, you're in a bidding chain war and you're not sure, do I bid that 7th chain or do I bid that 6th chain or do I just leave it? You know, maybe that can be the kind of thing that tips you over the edge in a 50-50. Maybe you can say, okay, actually, let's have a, you know, there's 2 gateway to dis here. Let's have a look at this deck list. How good are these gateway to dis? And that can kind of make those small changes. Just getting some more advanced stuff. We'll get to the more straightforward stuff in a bit. But that's kind of the idea there. So that's kind of what makes a board clear good, and it'll take time, and it's a very advanced skill to be able to tell just from a deck list how good the board wipe is, because it is important to be creating net positive situations. It's easy to say, I only had 3 creatures out and I killed 7 of my opponent. That's amazing, but if the deck itself doesn't lead for you to be gaining advantages, then it's just a terrible form of inequality, and that same play pattern will continue. So you either want to have kind of gained amber advantage before you board wipe, you want to have gained, you know, archive value, which is kind of card advantage, or at least hand selection, like just if you can kind of take your turns to kind of sculpt your hand, make suboptimal plays, and then board wipe, so those suboptimal plays didn't matter. So let's talk about how to play around a board wipe in a kind of general sense, where we're kind of just assuming our opponent has a card that says destroy all creatures, and it's going to destroy all creatures no matter what. So it's not as straightforward as in a normal card game. If I'm playing a normal card game, I will go, okay, I've got 3 good creatures out here. There's no need to commit anymore. They're just going to get killed anyway. So there's definitely no reason to play anymore. However, in Keyforge, there's no actual downside necessarily to playing an extra creature because it will replace itself. So that's not a strict downside. Instead of it costing you card advantage or losing you resources, it's more about the opportunity cost of what you could have done instead of playing with those creatures. So, playing additional creatures. So instead of playing additional creatures, I might want to see, okay, I have 5 of this house. I think my opponent's going to board clear next turn. I'm going to reaper these, get value while I can. Instead of playing more creatures, I'm only getting 1 amber for the turn, and then it all dies anyway. So that kind of immediate gaining of value versus developing more creatures. So it's the opportunity cost. I haven't actually lost any more resources by playing the creatures, but I've given up that chance to gain that amber, gain that instant value. And the other big thing that you can do instead of simply just saying, yep, I'm going to reap everything, is sculpting your hand. And that's a massive, massive part of Keyforge, is sculpting your hand. And I think that's kind of where a lot of the skill cap is, kind of by definition in a game without mana. If you're playing 6 cards a turn and your opponent's playing 2, you're going to be in a very, very good spot. But to play 6 cards a turn, you need your hand to all be of the same house. And so these turns where you suspect your opponent's going to board wipe or just needs to board wipe to win. You know, so that's kind of a big thing as well. Like, you don't always have to think they have it, But if it's their only way to get back into the game, then you play around it anyway. But instead of, you make suboptimal plays for this turn because you want to either clear your hand out or get rid of this one house, that kind of thing, archiving, all that kind of thing. So I think you either need to look for instant amber plays, instant value plays, or kind of sculpt your hand. So that's the kind of general theoretical sense of board wipes. And I think this, it might kind of sound a bit too crazy, a bit airy-fairy, going way too deep for no reason, no practical purposes. But I really, really do believe that having this kind of general theoretical understanding of the game and the ability to evaluate deck lists on the go is that's the main skill in Keyforge almost. I mean, obviously playing is very important as well, but if you're putting yourself in a position where you can be playing with the better deck when it's unclear, that's going to be a massive, massive advantage. So that's enough of the theory. Hopefully that's kind of made some sense. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that and what you think, how important do you actually think a theoretical understanding of Keyforge is, rather than just, turn up, play your deck, oh yeah, I killed 10 creatures, that's good, Anyway, we're going to get into the actual individual cards, the specific cards going through the houses. Now, last video I did a ranking for Amber Disruption, and it was, going descending and, well, ascending in strength, I guess, of how good it was at Amber Disruption. This one's going to be a little bit different. I haven't really ranked them. Well, I have ranked them, but it's not a ranking of strength of board wipes. It's more how I think you should be actively considering it. And that does correlate very highly to strength, but I wouldn't get too caught up on the specific rankings. I kind of wanted to focus more on how much you should play around these things and how much they should actually be on your mind, influencing your decisions. Because that's actually just as practical as anything else. A deck may be super good at something, but if you can't actually ever make decisions to change that, then it's not really that important to know. So anyway, let's get into it. And number 7, the one, probably the most irrelevant faction when it comes to board wipes, is Shadows. Basically, they only have Poison Wave. They have a couple of things situationally, like deal 2 damage or whatever. This kind of perfectly encapsulates Shadows' board wipes. They're not really going to do much to you. This is a common, so you'll see this a fair bit, so do be wary of it. But if you keep your things above 2 power, if you're not too weak to this, it's going to be pretty good. And often Shadows cards will have 2 attacks, so it's not the biggest concern. Keep it in mind, but not really going to be your main concern. When you're worrying about board wipes, it's going to be more about the other 2 houses your opponent has than Shadows. Not much to say there. Alright, the next one is Sanctum. Now, Sanctum actually has 3 cards that kind of board wipe conditionally. They're not actually true board wipes. And I put it as number 6 because even though they can be strong, they're just 3 rares and they're conditional as well. So not only is it a small chance your opponent's going to have it, they're also just not going to always hit. So it's not something you really should honestly play around too much. And often this is going to be cards that you'll play around if you know your opponent has it in the deck, or if you are so far ahead. It's a big skilling card game. I'm so far ahead, let me just think of the craziest way I could lose. And then you play around. And that's maybe what these cards are, the knowledge of these cards is good for. So you got Numquid the Fair, which is just a play effect. Destroy an enemy creature and repeat this effect if your opponent still controls more creatures than you. So really, this is mainly going to be a destroy a creature on the stick. It is important to consider sometimes if you know your opponent has it, you don't want to overextend. But it is a rare, and it is, again, situational. So I wouldn't put too much thought actively in a normal game where you don't know deck lists into cards like this. This applies to the Spirit's Way. Now this is a rare. It's very blurry. It does say destroy an enemy creature with each creature with power 3 or higher. So this is the closest thing they have to a true board wipe, though obviously you can play around it if you know it's in your opponent's deck. Again, I wouldn't worry too much about a rare that's situational unless you know your opponent has it. I think that's kind of an important thing because it's a unique deck building game and it's all randomly generated, you can't really worry about playing around every card. Same goes for Vemos Lightbringer. Destroy each elusive creature. Again, this is going to be something that comes up very rarely. It's a rare, and it's very situational at that. But, maybe sometimes you're against a Sanctum deck, you have a bunch of elusive creatures out, and you think, maybe this is the only way I could lose. So, something to keep in mind. So, yes, they actually had a couple of tools that technically board wipe more than the next house, but because they're rares and situational, I thought, you're not really going to be considering them unless you know they're in the deck. Oh, let me drop my microphone. All right, on to the next one, and that is Mars. Mars don't really, they have a couple of things, but this kind of encapsulates them all of dealing 3 damage to each creature. Now they have this effect, which is instant, the most relevant one, and it is a common, so this is definitely something you would want to play around, which kind of overlaps nicely with a lot of the other houses AoE. So I think kind of as a general play pattern, you will tend to adopt not playing a bunch of low power creatures all at one go. And they have a couple other cards that can situationally deal 3 damage, but this is basically, if you play around this, you're kind of playing around everything they can kind of do, and most of it takes a turn anyway. So pretty simple with Mars, and you'll kind of see from most of the houses, it's a play pattern of not playing too many small creatures. Alright, on to logos. Now logos is a little bit weird. They kind of have this one effect, which is on Neutron Shark and on Bouncing Death Quark. So basically, it's destroy an enemy creature and a friendly creature, and then this card just lets you keep going if you don't draw logos. The other one just does it indefinitely, well, as long as you can, where you kind of kill a creature of each. So that's something to consider if your opponent has a bunch of weak creatures that don't mind dying, or if they have no creatures. The way that Keyforge rules work is you complete as much of the card as possible. So I can destroy an enemy creature, and even if I don't have a friendly creature, it can keep repeating. So you can actually clear a enemy board entirely, even if you have not enough creatures. I believe that's how it works. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. That's the same with Bouncing Death Quark. It just affects as many times as possible to repeat the entire effect. So this one's a bit different, definitely worse than Neutron Shark, I would say. And then they use got Strange Gizmo, just to, you know, it's a situational board clear. You will see it coming. I kind of wish they actually made this card after anyone forges a key, because then it could actually kind of create some interesting game plan situations where you let your opponent forge a key, or you avoid getting a 6 amber. As it is, it's kind of, you know, you'll see it coming. You can even sometimes do something about it. Don't really, you know, wouldn't consider this card too much. It is a rare as well, but I just wanted to show it. I think it's a pretty cool card, and just give my thoughts. I think it really should have been, when anyone forges a key, I think it could have been a lot more interesting. Maybe it's not balanced, who knows. Anyway, next one is Untamed. Now, Untamed is coming in at number 3. This top 3 is a little bit different, but the main reason for this is that Untamed kind of has this one true board clear, and that is, sorry, my microphone is just annoying me, is Save the Pack, which is destroy each damaged creature and gain 1 chain. Now, this one is very, very powerful and definitely something you should keep in mind. It's a common, and it has the power to be a one-sided board clear. And that is really, really powerful and really, really important, because if you're kind of not aware of this card, it can blow you out. Other board clears won't necessarily blow you out because they're normally symmetrical. Anytime you have the potential to reliably have a one-sided board wipe, that's kind of something that I think card game players, our minds start to, you know, have some alarm bells. This card could be really good. I think Save the Pack is really good, especially because it has enablers like cooperative hunting. So deal 1 damage for each friendly creature in play. So this is also common, and I imagine that the algorithm will actually probably put these cards together a fair amount. And this is almost kind of like a board wipe itself sometimes. Like, it's something you can kind of play around in the same sense, that you need to, you know, look at your own board. How susceptible is it to getting wiped by cooperative hunting? So when you kind of play around cooperative hunting, you kind of play around Save the Pack at the same time. So kind of included these two together, even though this one's not a real board wipe. And there's a few other enablers that do similar things. You know, a couple of effects that can situationally deal damage, a small amount of damage to every creature, but for the most part, they're mainly going to be Save the Pack enablers. Again, so they don't have you know, multiple board wipes; they just have Save the Pack. But because it can be one-sided, it's really, really important to consider and play around, and can be very, very powerful. All right, on to Dis. So Dis was put number 2nd. Again, I don't think it's weaker at board wiping than Brobnar, which is number 1. But because it's more generic catch-all, it's not something you'll really be thinking about as much on a constant basis, whereas I think Brobnar you need to be thinking about all the time. So we'll just start off with Gateway to Dis, pretty iconic. It is a common card, which destroys each creature, and you gain 3 chains. So this is kind of coming back to what I was talking about, how a board wipe's not always a net positive. 3 chains is a very real cost. That's giving up 3 cards. you know, that actually is negative card advantage. So you need to be playing a deck where this isn't just to equalize, because you equalize and then you're down 3 cards over the next 3 turns. That's pretty bad. But in the right deck, this card can be insane because you can play around it and create these situations that we talked about where you have a net positive from this board wipe. As far as playing it around it, this kind of goes back to our general principle of, you know, gaining instant value through Reaping from Amber and hand selection. Okay, pretty straightforward, but definitely something to keep in mind. Going to be in a lot of decks as a common, and I think people will kind of naturally gravitate towards playing these Gateway to Dis decks because it, you know, coming from other card games, something that's like, I guess we kind of everything's 0 mana, but it feels like a 0 mana card. Board wipe and then play out my hand. It actually feels pretty strong, even if it's not always in every deck that strong. So I think you'll see this card a fair bit, I imagine. Key to this is very, very powerful. The ability to destroy each creature on any house is really, really good. I'm not sure, I wasn't sure if I should include this one, but it's just so powerful that I wanted to. Even though it's not something you really need to be actively thinking about because you'll have a turn to react to it. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying about how a certain deck will benefit from board clears more. Key to Dis will work really well in a deck that has super good proactive plays in a different house. The value of this card really, really goes up because I can do this and then maybe I can have a massive Untamed turn at the same time after I board clear. Whereas, you know, if I have bad proactive plays in Dis, then Gateway to Dis is a lot worse. Anyway, that's enough for that. It's a very, very powerful card, but again, you don't have to be constantly thinking about it because it does take a turn to activate. Throw Fates is another one. I did include this. It's not technically a board wipe, but it does have the potential to, you know, really blow you out of the water. It is an uncommon, so you'll see it a little bit, like, you know, not as much as the commons, obviously, but it can be very, very powerful. It's not something I'd always be considering, but maybe, you know, once you're an advanced player, you see your opponent kind of make something that's a little bit strange that kind of kills off one of their more powerful creatures. Just having it in the back of your mind, sometimes you'll be able to get a read on it, and then obviously when you know it's in the deck list, it's very, very important to play around. Again, this can be a one-sided board wipe, and those are always very, very powerful. So it's something I wanted to include there. Alright, onto Brobnar, which was number 1. You can talk about how strong it is. This is how often you should be considering playing around board wipes against this house. And I think Brobnar is very, very important. But, because they have multiple options for situational board clears, but they can kind of all be played around, which I think is really nice design, and really, really important if you're trying to play well. So Coward's End is probably the most iconic one. It's a common, so you'll see it a lot. Destroy each undamaged creature, which gains you 3 chains as well. So the clear kind of way to play around this is our normal anti-board wipe principles of instant value and hand selection, as well as just making sure your creatures are damaged. And targeting your opponent's creatures that are damaged, because they will live through. So even if you don't have a good way to damage your own creatures, you want to target their cards that will live through this. So a lot of room to play around with, and in a sense it does kind of tie into the way you play around the cards, so it makes it a little bit easier to play around it. I'll get to that in a second though. So the other kind of theme with board wipes in Brobnar is killing small minions, small creatures I should say. Earthshaker is one that encapsulates this pretty well. Play effect, destroy each power with 3 or lower. Brobnar's whole kind of thing is strength and, you know, dominating those who are weaker than you. So that's kind of the theme of their board wipes, and you can kind of keep this general principle in mind when playing against Brobnar. It's not something I have to be thinking, okay, I'm going to play around Earthshaker, or my next card, Heave the Huge. I'm not necessarily having to play around each individual one. Understand it, because you don't know if they're in the deck, you know. It goes back to what I was saying in the other video. It's very important in Keyforge to understand how the house functions as a whole, because that's what you know, and you can't play against a meta deck, you're playing against the house. So understanding how Brobnar functions, you know, it will do a lot to swarmy boards with lots of low power creatures. Another one that's interesting is just, so that kind of effect is throughout Brobnar, and there's also just Champion's Challenge, which is again a bit more of a situational card, but it does destroy every creature apart from the the most powerful one on each side, and then they fight. So basically, it's a kind of, yeah, it's not a one-sided board wipe, but when your opponent plays this card, if they have the most powerful creature on the board, they will come out with one creature on their side and then something on the other. Again, it's a rare, so I wouldn't worry too much about playing around this. But like I'm saying, with the way you play around the houses in general, not playing these kind of smaller minions, focusing on a bigger minion, you can see that these all cards kind of line up in the same way. Even Coward's End, if you're playing bigger creatures, they're more likely to get damaged because they're more likely to survive a hit and then get damaged, right? So it kind of comes down to that in the end, where you just want to be playing more beefier creatures against Brobner, though you need to be careful when you play these beefy creatures because Coward's End is the main one to play around. So that's kind of the general principle. Hopefully that's making some kind of sense. I really do want to iterate, it's kind of more about knowing the house than worrying about these individual cards. Hopefully I've gone over enough of how the house kind of functions as a board wipe house. So you don't need to remember every specific card, you don't need to play around specific cards all the time, because the house tends to board wipe in a specific way, just like it tends to disrupt in a specific way. So that's the kind of idea. Let me know what you thought of this video. It did get very theoretical at the start, though I really do think that Keyforge, I think is really, really cool in the fact that it kind of rewards this deep understanding of the game on a general sense. It's not about learning the meta decks and, okay, I know I got to do this when I have this hand in turn 1 and all these kind of things. It's about knowing the game as a whole and this really, really unique skill of being able to evaluate a deck strength just looking at the deck list. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if there's anything you want me to focus in my next Keyforge house analysis video. If you enjoyed this and want to see more Keyforge content or artifact content in the future, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time, guys.